I have a question. Maybe you don't treat those things, aspects, but I'm a father, and if I think of my children and Advaita, how can I just, or would you think of a way that I can just behave or have a relationship with them like they have like this feeling of not making worse this duality,
no.
or like letting them somehow from the very beginning think of the possibility that they are not, there is no self and all that stuff.
No. I mean, what I'd say to that, I wouldn't say anything different in this context. I used to be a lecturer, and I dealt with sort of psychological and psychotherapeutic issues, and sometimes we talk about parenting and so on. I wouldn't say anything different in this forum than in that forum. I just say something, practical. What I say, bring children up with as few boundaries as possible, and make those boundaries that you do have as clear as possible, and don't keep changing them. Seems pretty obvious, really. So no.
Because it seems like somehow to live here in our society that the children need a little bit to build a good sense of themselves.
Yeah, in a way.
And then somehow also be critical to, in a certain point, deconstruct this, or come to Advaita, or come to, or have this spiritual necessity of something else. But at the very beginning, it seems that it's important that the person creates its own feeling, a good ego.
Maybe there might be a sense that there could be some relaxation there, because really that's out of your hands. But I'd agree with what you're saying. One of the phenomena, I've talked about this often, and I'll mention it now, I think bears out what you're saying in a way. We're talking just in practical, ordinary, everyday terms, is that there are individuals, I've met and talked to some of them, where I feel that like the very solid sense of self, personhood, if you like, that tends to happen for most of us. There are individuals where it doesn't happen like that. Either maybe it doesn't happen at all, or it happens only in quite a fragile way. So in a way you could say, oh, that's great, actually, because that sense of separation isn't really strongly there, and then later on maybe it's kind of easier for this surface to be seen through, and non-dual realization, whatever you want to call it, to take place. Of course that's all completely out of anybody's hands, but you think, oh, well, maybe that's great. But what I've noticed in talking to individuals where this has been the case when they're young, is that often their childhood has been, particularly their adolescence, has been quite difficult, because they haven't, I know there's lots of other ways adolescence can be difficult as well, but in the cases I'm thinking of, because they haven't had that kind of drive, because they've not been able to take this seriously. And I've talked to one person in particular, and I remember, the terms in which she described it, that she couldn't understand why everybody was taking it so seriously, because it just seemed obvious to her that it wasn't serious, it wasn't real in some way. I can't remember whether she actually described it as a play, which is quite a good analogy, drama, not as in the play of consciousness, but a play like in the theatre. It kind of looks real, but it isn't really. But definitely this was the way she described it. This was difficult for her, and she lacked ambition. And at the point which I knew her, which I don't know, she was probably in her late 20s, mid to late 20s maybe. That side of life, the practical side of life, wasn't really working for her very well, because I suppose in the terms of the kind of strict parent, she had never been able to apply herself to anything, because it just, why would you? Because it's not serious. So that kind of bear out what you're saying, that you know, if you want to be ambitious, and I don't know, I mean, there's kind of growing evidence that if you really want to be successful and ambitious, it's probably best if you're a sociopath, frankly. But I know you don't get any choice over it. I'm not suggesting you try to turn your children into sociopaths. But there's quite a lot of evidence, you know, if you really want to succeed and become the boss of a multinational company and own a Mediterranean yacht, then it's probably best if you start out as a sociopath. So in a sense, what we're talking about here, it doesn't map onto what most people consider, what's the air quotations, consider the real world. It just doesn't map onto it. And if ambitious parents did know about this, they would take their children by the hand and run away from it as fast as possible. I mean, you think of those tiger mothers. I was talking to somebody, I had a Skype session with somebody the other day, and she was Canadian, and she used a phrase I'd never heard before. She said she was a tiger mother and a helicopter mother. Do you have that?
Yes, sure.
Yeah, I'd never heard of it before.
What does that mean?
You know, always hovering around the child.
Okay.
Yeah, if you're a tiger mother and you actually did have some kind of feel for what we're talking about here, you wouldn't want your children anywhere near it. I mean, maybe there are multi-billionaire heads of multinational companies who are in a who see non-duality. Maybe there are, I don't know. How would I know? But I wouldn't recommend it. I know this is nonsense. You do understand I'm talking nonsense here because we're talking about something which is uncaused. So, you know, what happens, happens. But I think what you're saying makes perfect sense in terms of, you know, how we normally think of childhood development and so on. Yeah. I thought you were going to ask a different question, and I thought you were going to ask this question more about kind of what the relationship is like. You know, if there is a person who believes that they have entities called children and that they are a parent, that's kind of normal way of thinking. I thought you were going to ask about, like, well, what's likely to happen to that if the sense of personhood falls away, but you didn't ask about that, so I don't have to answer it. Sometimes people do ask about that.
Sometimes I think of my parents, and I sometimes think, why they didn't tell me this before, or they didn't discover these things, and of course I realized it is a path, it's something that you really have to experience, and then, because maybe even if they have, my father had told me something about Advaita, which I don't remember, at a certain point, for me it couldn't make any sense, so I would have just completely forgotten, like you did with your guru, that he was talking about non-duality and you didn't remember.
Yeah. I didn't hear it. It's not that I didn't remember it. I didn't even hear it at the time. Yeah.
I sometimes think, could I already? Of course, what I understand, I live it somehow in a sense that I understand life, and this I'm already showing that to my children. But I'm also thinking, can I tell them something? Can I? Well, we'll see.
We'll see. Maybe you will. Maybe you won't. I mean, speaking conventionally, and this is a ridiculous phrase, I have 2 children. I mean, what a ridiculous phrase, but nevertheless, conventionally, one of them's quite interested in this, and one of them isn't, and so what?
Yeah, but this is somehow the problem. Not me, but yeah, we are somehow living in 2 worlds, you know? We still have to be here and go to work and bring my children to school.
Yeah, in a way.
And this makes the whole thing much more problematic, because I mean, if this world would be something different, then of course I could just concentrate on what's really important, and then but I still have to somehow take care of my children, of course, they are children, it's a name, and they're just two persons, but they are with me, my family, and I have to take care of them, so somehow they are my children.
Yeah.
And this is really, yeah.
And within that, what happens, happens. And I think last night I mentioned somebody that I know who abandoned their 4 children to go off to be a sannyasin. They're not the only one that's done that. I know individuals who, I'm using this phrase a bit carelessly, but or this word, I know sort of quite, a few individuals who in conventional terms completely trashed their lives to go off to India to be in ashrams for years. They abandoned very promising careers, they abandoned families, they abandoned wives, husbands or children, went off to India. Well, so that's what happens. We think we're making a choice about it maybe, but maybe we do.